Hello everyone, welcome to another Nuraldeen episode. Today we have another distinguished guest with us, Zafar Sobhan, formerly editor of Dhaka Tribune and now a
The
senior
founding editor.
journalist, a founding editor of Dhaka Tribune and now a senior journalist, and uh, and heading to be more illustrious things to do soon. So last time we had a conversation with Jafar. It was in November, right after the election of President Trump. So at that time, rightfully, along with the whole world, people in Bangladesh was also quite apprehensive. It's what's going to imply for Bangladesh, what is going to happen. So around 5 months or 4 months have passed since that episode, and a lot of things have happened, and fortunately not much from that front. So but domestically a lot of things have happened, and the election schedule is coming up to us like inexorably. So at this time, so we like to pick up on that conversation again. So what's the current situation, international situation for Bangladesh? What's the domestic situation for Bangladesh? What is the prospect for the election in this year and our much longed for democratic transition? So today we have with us Zafar Sobhan, whom already mentioned to you, then Jyoti Rahman, our regular host and participant, economist, and we have Ehteshamul Haque, a lawyer in Washington, D.C., right at the Trump territory, heart of the Trump territory. So, Jyoti, can you ask the first question to
Okay.
everyone?
Sure. Yeah. No, thanks, Shafiq, for the introduction, and welcome, Zafar and Ehtesham. Okay, so I'm going to put it out to make a statement and seek your reaction. Okay. So the statement is that as far as the the global or international pressures are concerned, or as far as challenges are concerned, external challenges are concerned, politically, worst is behind us. We have handled it. So that's the provocative statement. I have some thoughts, but I'll come back after all of you have spoken. Start with maybe Zafar.
So I'm up to bat?
Off the bat.
Okay, and everyone can hear me fine?
Yeah.
We can hear you.
Good, super. I am boringly inclined to agree with Jyoti's initial statement. I think, and not just externally, I would say internally, I think the worst is behind us. I think the first 6 months were the trickiest months for the interim government as it struggled to find its feet. There were economic shocks to deal with, both internal and external. Law and order was a problem. I think now we're more sort of 8 or 9 months in, things seem to be stabilizing. Prices during Ramzan were more or less okay. I think there's some notion that I've seen a recent report that poverty has risen a little bit, but then again, it's also been said that that's due to the contractionary monetary policy being put in place by Bangladesh banks. So there's a reason for all of this. So I think internally, the interim government has found its feet, and externally, we had all wondered, what did the election of Donald Trump, what would that mean for the interim government of Professor Muhammad Yunus? And I think what we have learned is that possibly, as we are wont to do in Bangladesh, is we are tending to read too much into the tea leaves and make too much of a big deal of something which is actually more of a minor deal. And maybe Ehtesham can speak to this more authoritatively, seeing as he is living in Washington and DC and would probably have more greater access than any of us to the decision makers in America on that score. But my sense is that it's not going to presage any great change in American policy vis-a-vis Bangladesh. I think Professor Yunus is using his stature and his network and his connections to essentially ameliorate whatever problem is being faced. I think having a conversation with Elon Musk and raising the issue of Starlink coming to Bangladesh was a very good move, and I think that's done a lot. And I think, fundamentally, he understands that Trump is a transactional president, and so the way to get him on your side is to do business with him. Similarly, Trump actually, it turns out, has a great deal of problems and issues with India as a country. He is, of course, I think, has a good personal relationship with Narendra Modi, but the fact that, that fair trade is very high up, is he sees it, fair trade is very high up on his agenda, and that India is notorious for being one of the countries with the most protectionist trade regimen that exists, as well as the fact that America is absolutely filled with Indian immigrants, H-1B visa holders, and the like, which has again turned into a bit of a hot button issue. So that means that it's not as though he is going to. It seems very clear now that it's not as though they're going to turn everything into over to Modi, which was of course the apprehension. And of course, when they had their joint press conference some months back, when he said, "I'll leave Bangladesh to Prime Minister Modi," that raised a big issue. And and all of these people saying, "Oh well, that's it." It's like leaving a hen house in the hands of the fox. But that's not nearly what he said or what he meant. And I think that's very clear. That said, I do think both internally and externally, and maybe this will come to a future question and we can take it up then, is that it doesn't then necessarily mean that this government now is going to then dig in for the long haul. But I think that's a point we'll have later on in this discussion. So I'll leave it there for
now. Thanks, Zafar. I tend to agree with you that, as I said, that the worst is behind us. That was my sense. One thing that you hadn't mentioned, and I would ask Shafiq about this, which is Professor Yunus's China trip and how that would play in Washington. But before I go to Shafiq, I'm going to ask Ehtesham, sort of if you have any thoughts on what Zafar just has said.
I do. Thank you so much. And thank you, Zafar, for your take. So, like back in the days, there used to be a time when if you were another team playing Bangladesh, let's say a similar strength team, your main concern would be get through 10 overs by Mashrafi Murtaza, get through 10 overs by Shakib, and the rest of the bowlers wouldn't pose you too much headache. So I think for the interim government in the domestic front, a succession of crises starting from the demand for the resignation of the president to the July proclamation, and then the last controversy, which was about a meeting between the army chief and some student leaders, laid bare that what is holding Bangladesh stable are one Mashrafi and one Shakib in national institution format. And as long as these two institutions are standing together, we're able to weather the crises, and which is why you see one after another crises coming up and being fomented to try to weaken these two institutions and maybe drive a wedge between them. That's the domestic side.
Just to be clear on the cricketing analogy, we are talking about the former Pakistani pace bowler, Waqar Yunus. Just kidding.
We are maybe half of Waqar Yunus.
Go on. Yeah, sorry.
On the international front, making clear that I have no particular access rather than the news, same as all of you. Usually, American decision makers have a capacity to deal with 2.5 problems at any one time. Just like at one point, the US military used to say they can fight 2.5 wars at any one time. So right now, there are two very combustible problems in Gaza and Israel, and then Ukraine and Russia. And then the half problem is the things that come up in the rest of the world, the ludicrous group chat in Signal, which I'm sure has struck a chord with all of us, being knowing how much we're on WhatsApp and Signal and Telegram. So, but these two, I'm an optimist. So I think both these issues in Ukraine and in Gaza will fade, and there will be resolution. And then the US or the Trump foreign policy team is sort of divided into two wings. One thinks that the rest of the world takes too much advantage of us and we need to pull back. The other half, which is generally led by Marco Rubio and the National Security Advisor Michael Waltz, they think it's still, fair that the US dominate the world, but we should focus on China. So when the Russia-Ukraine and the Israel-Gaza are no longer hot wars and have some type of an arrangement in place, then the US focus, I expect, will turn to China. And when US turns thinking about China, immediately it starts becoming more fond of India. And then it's up to India and Bangladesh and the people of Bangladesh what increased effect and regard for India means for Bangladesh. I'll end here.
Thanks, Ehtesham. So over to Shafiq on China, because Chief Advisor is in China as we speak. We're recording this on the 27th of March.
Yeah. So I echo Ehtesham on that. Like right at this moment, America's focus is not on China, and China is also has become is China is not like a Cold War Russia. Like we have to make a fundamental distinction between that. The Cold War Russia, in Cold War war, the Soviet Union versus USA, there was a clear two sides, like a two rivalry for the world. But China has been playing a very patient game. It's not yet like a gone into that Cold War mode. So it's very much interested to keep up the trade linked with America going, and like there's like a economic rivalry going on, not like a military or strategic rivalry. So and a lot of players within the US administration, like Elon Musk and others, they are actually very integrated with China, and even like the big businesses like who like Wall Street and other people, those who have like a quite a big say in any US administration, they are also do not want the US China relation to go bad. So at this moment, Bangladesh closing up to China, I don't think it poses any bigger risk in getting Washington crosshair or something like that. So it's all good. And but the thing that I'm more not worried about, but like a little bit concerned about, the thing is going on with Myanmar, because Myanmar is like a, by many accounts, is a slowly imploding country. And whenever a country gradually implodes, it creates a lot of uncertainties, spillovers, and different strategic plays that like upsets all of the equations. Like I'm not in like a Myanmar expert. I don't know about this many fractions and who is getting upper hand, who is getting lower hand. What's the exact strategic interest of India, China, and USA in that? I'm not an expert on that, but I'm worried about that because an imploding country is a really big crisis. So on that thing, if uh, on that thing, like I'm more like worried about like how is that gonna play over for Bangladesh, and how is gonna the big three players, US, China, and India, all of them has great interest on that area. So how will that play out? So that's what I'm worried about. But yeah, coming back to the scenario, like so far, like as Zafar said, that internationally it all seemed good, because I'm particularly I'm heartened by the statement by Tulsi Gabbard and other people, none of whom exactly singled out Bangladesh government as a kind of villain or anything. They all mentioned that the government is talking with the Bangladesh government like very diplomatic language. Even Marco Rubio said that, like, you don't like talk about that a country whom you have like a ill intention or something like that, or like it seems that America regards Bangladesh as a normal country to work with and to like to apply diplomatic pressure or any other thing or anything like that. So in that way, I'm very much relieved till now that the, 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 the effort of vilification that went out after August 5 about Bangladesh, that Bangladesh has become taken over by a radical Islamist army, mob regime, and something like that, and there's like a pogroms going on in the country. That seems to have like a not swayed the global opinion against us. So I'm very much relieved on that, and hope this continues, that our situation is being like treated as a normal democratic transition in a country after a long period of authoritarianism. So I'm seeing it that way.
Thanks, Shafiq. We'll move to the domestic challenges shortly, but just one more on international, and I'll probably go in the same order, Zafar, Ehtesham, and Shafiq, but much more briefly than before. So this is about Myanmar and it's about India. So on Myanmar, I think you were right, Shafiq, that this is something to watch out for. This is something that US and China obviously care about, but also sort of it would have implications for Southeast Asia and rest of the region. So many countries would be interested if and as Myanmar implodes, and spillovers for other countries would be much larger than Bangladesh, right? Like, the border between Myanmar and Bangladesh is only a tiny part of Myanmar's, broader border. Thailand probably would be affected a lot more. And whatever intentions US might have, I would imagine would probably, any conduit or any passage or anything like that probably would go through Bangkok, then through Dhaka. So that's a statement. I will see, your reactions, but also India. All right. So I think last time we talked, Zafar, you said that, look, Indians would eventually come to accept it because they have no other choice. Hasina is a spent force. There is no taker or there is no prospects for bringing her back. India would need to work with Bangladesh, and therefore it would need to work with a more durable Bangladesh government that does not style itself interim. You said those things last time, and therefore we I think we discussed that, and the implication was that, okay, if you were India, you would seek to work with the largest political party that is most likely to win the next election. Have we progressed on that front? So yeah.
Okay, so it's a tall order because it's two separate questions, but we
two separate questions. One observation and a question. Yeah.
But we've been instructed to speak at less length than for the first one, but I'll do my best. Okay. I think it's very clear, and Shafiq mentioned the restraint which was shown by the US government, for instance, in their various statements vis-a-vis Bangladesh. I think we should also mention the official statements coming out of New Delhi have also been similarly restrained. There's a lot of rhetoric which is coming from media, from social media, from establishment figures who we may take as proxies for the Indian government. But the Indian government itself, as far as I am aware, has been, I would say, relatively restrained. And I think that's that shows pragmatism on their part. And I think my understanding is that they are ready to make their peace with BNP, who are likely to win the next election, who are the biggest political party in Bangladesh at present. I think it's clear that they are suspicious and uncomfortable with Yunus, not because of Yunus per se, but because of the students who they perceive to be influencing him, and they also perceive that he is in lockstep with them, which I think is a misperception, by the way. And I think for a number of reasons, they are putting all of their eggs into the election basket. And they feel that once Bangladesh has elections and an elected government comes to power, that is what they feel most comfortable with. And increasingly, if you've seen recent polls like the one done by Innovision, that's what Bangladeshis feel as well. So it seems as though we are all, except for one shrinking constituency inside the country, on the same page, both internally and externally. With Myanmar, if I was, I've always said that it seems to me that the US will use Myanmar as a means to sort of place pressure on China, the way they did with Afghanistan and the Soviet Union in the 1980s. It seems the obvious move. If I were them, that's what I would do. And this is a big problem for China. But unfortunately, it's also a big problem for India, because India has also, it's not just China, it's also India, which has invested massively in Arakan State, in Sitwe, and so this is a big problem for them. Similarly, India also has, as you mentioned, massive borders with Myanmar, and all of the states which India have bordering Myanmar have minorities who are in conflict with the majority population of the state, and also have their own co-religionists and co-ethnic groups in the adjoining state in Myanmar, be it Chin, be it any other state. And so this is actually a big issue for India as well. I think for Bangladesh, actually, it's we are better off with the Arakan army taking over Rakhine State rather than the junta or the government of Aung San Suu Kyi, for the simple reason that the Arakan is that they're a weaker power. The Arakan army has no air force, so we are much better able to then protect our border and advance our interests vis-a-vis the Rohingya population who are sitting in Bangladesh, as well as the Rohingyas who remain in Arakan State. With the Arakan army at the helm of affairs, than we are with either the junta or actually a government sitting in Naypyidaw.
Thanks, Zafar. Ehtesham, then Traffic, before we move on to the domestic side.
So I'd like all of us to sit back and reflect on the delicious irony of the statement that was just said. India has put all its eggs on an election in Bangladesh. Amazing. Yes. How things
12
have
months
changed.
ago, we would have, reflected on that and feel depressed.
Correct.
Yes. And, we would have seen the usual statements about elections are an internal matter for Bangladesh to decide. So,
Yeah.
yes. No, I think, there is the Hasina question still looming over us, and it's been a little more messy than it should have been because, we are hashing it out in public with emotions and feelings. But this question will be decided once and for all. And a lot of it will depend on how the next election is held and who are the participants. And then I do hope that the question will die down. For the Myanmar issue, the Arakan army is now controlling the strip that borders Bangladesh. Arakan army is very much weaker. This is more of a question of my part. It's due to my ignorance. I don't know if Bangladesh government, it probably can't have an official policy, but whether it establishes or maintains any type of relationship with Arakan army that can lead to an understanding. Because I thought at least a couple of years ago that there was some type of a hostile relationship with the Arakan army. So I hope that has changed. There can be some type of coexistence until things in Myanmar shake out further.
I think the previous government was very much formally, the view was that we're not talking to Arakan army. We don't want to talk to them. They're not our friend, they are bad or something. But Zafar, Shafiq, you guys.
That's absolutely correct. So the Awami League government had an official position not to talk to the Arakan army, which I think was short-sighted and counterproductive. In the new government, I believe has reversed that policy. And so we're not saying that we will ally with them, but I think we're at least opening the door to discussion, which I think is certainly a better standpoint and more practical.
Shafiq, any thoughts on, you started the Myanmar thing, so we're circling back to you.
No, I don't have any particular thoughts but we have two goals here. Like one goal is that Arakan should be, the Myanmar situation should be stable enough, stable so that it doesn't create problem for us. But another question is that what to do with the big Rohingya population here, the people that are already inside. And these two goals may not be I'm not sure exactly how, if Arakan army takes over the whole province, whether that serves that our purpose of repatriating the Rohingya people. Um, I don't know if that facilitates or I'm not very optimistic on that side. So my big issue is quite internal, like what we would do with these Rohingya people, 1 million or nearly 1 million. So there's because of US aid funding cut, there's a big issue of that. So I guess we have to spend nearly 1 billion or so to just feed them. But so this is a big question for me. Even if the external situation stabilizes, I'm not seeing exactly the people going back very soon, because even if Arakan army takes over, it may not create the situation stable enough to go back. So we have to think about what to do with the Rohingya people in a more economical and realistic way, and also,
I think we
of
should.
course, a human way.
Yeah, if I could just jump in very quickly about to address that particular issue. I think it does facilitate the return of the Rohingya for a very simple reason. One of the reasons we were unable to do anything about the pogrom of Rohingyas in 2017, 2018 was because we didn't have the military power to do so. There have been similar movements of Rohingya into Bangladesh in the 1970s and the 1990s. Many of them were subsequently returned because we had military parity. What has happened in the meantime is that they have an air defense system and we do not. So if we try to counteract that incursion militarily, we ran the risk of having Chittagong port bombed. We ran the risk of having Dhaka bombed. Okay, and we never talk about this actually. That there was a military. It wasn't a coincidence that the incursion happened when it happened, and that there was a military aspect to it, readiness aspect to it, and we were unready. The thing, as I mentioned before, the Arakan army doesn't have an air force, so we are in a much stronger position to actually forcibly to repatriate people if we so wish. I don't think we're going to do it, and I think Shafiq is also right that I don't think this is an immediate solution to the problem, and I don't think that it will immediately lead to a large-scale repatriation. But I think it does fundamentally change things on the ground in Bangladesh's interest if our interest, our long-term interest, is in the repatriation of the Rohingya back to their homelands in Rakhine State.
Thanks. From what I'm hearing, I think we should probably get a Myanmar expert and have a detailed conversation on that, because I'm hearing reasonable things from everyone, and I'm thinking that I actually don't know much about this, so I would learn a lot from talking to an expert. However, today, bringing it back to the domestic challenges and so on. So, Zafar, you had also said that not just external, but on the domestic side, things have improved. Ehtesham, you had also mentioned, the recurring drama or recurring, push to, bring apart the twin institutions of power and personnel, right? The army chief and the chief advisor. So picking up on those threads.
I didn't necessarily say that they were the army chief and the chief advisor that I was referring to. Just to clarify.
Just to clarify, okay. Were there somebody else you were referring to? That's what I was inferring, but
I think the pattern we've seen is that, all these demands are made, and then they run into BNP, which says no, and then they die down.
but they being the army chief and the chief advisor, or their institutions or their offices, basically, that, okay, look, things are getting out of hand. What do you suggest? And BNP sort of says no, and things die down.
No, I think the two institutions, excuse me, the two institutions that have kept the country stable are the Office of the Army Chief and BNP.
I see. Okay. All right. Okay. No, so that's so I'll come back to that, because some of my questions would lead to that. So hold on to that thought. Quickly mentioning the economic stuff, I don't think that's going to cause any controversy, but again, I'll give a statement, and then only if somebody differs, we'll go to him. Okay. Just purely in the interest of time, because what Ehtesham said is very interesting, and I can see that Zafar is ready to go. So, okay, on the economy, so my sense is that the economy is stabilizing because government, interim government, has been following what would say sensible, appropriate steps, both on macro and micro. So sort of keeping the tackling the inflation broadly was the first priority. Stabilizing the currency was a priority. Stabilizing the banks. Those were the three things. Keeping prices stable during Ramadan, meant getting, being proactive. Zafar and I think, talked about whether onion counts as a staple or not, but regardless, iftars this year were more affordable than in many years or decades. So, sort of all of those things. So my sense is that they have tried to be proactive, and they have so far been successful. Of course, sort of one never knows. With the summer coming up, energy, electricity, load sheddings, those things would be a big challenge to meet. But with our luck holding, maybe remittances and exports would continue. A durable economic recovery is not likely until after the election, mainly because of political certainty or lack thereof. But that's basically all there is to the economy. What am I missing, if anything?
You said only to talk if we disagree.
All right. Okay, good. Fantastic. Well, that's actually a very poor economic analysis then, because there is no on the other hand. So, I'm not really sure how to take that. Okay. However, so, sort of the other domestic challenges. One, day-to-day law and order. All right. So police is still somewhat dysfunctional, I believe, but I'm not in Dhaka. Zafar and Shafiq, you guys are. So that's one. So this is just seeing from the perspective of ordinary citizen, not necessarily, sort of political arsonists or political drama artists, right? So so that's a question that, how is the law and order situation, and what do you think are prospects? So that's one question. Separate track is that there are these recurring drama that we see, sort of every few weeks or months, sort of starting with the resignation of the president, or the July proclamation, I would probably say the demolition of the house in Dhanmondi 32. Even if the initial outburst was spontaneous, maybe the things that happened the days after were most definitely not spontaneous. They were orchestrated, as in, people actually went, sort of to locals and in across the country and targeted Awami League offices and other individuals. So that did not seem like a spontaneous outburst. And most recently, the drama over the army chiefs meeting with the student leaders. So these kind of things, there's a pattern to this that Ehtesham talked about. Can we extrapolate on those patterns and speculate about risks? So that's the second question. So one is normal law and order, as in day-to-day, things. The other, sort of North-South university students going and trying to rob a bank. I think, I woke up to a news of something of that effect. Those kind of things. There is this kind of repeated political drama pattern. And the third thing I would draw your attention to, something that both the acting BNP chief and the army chief have mentioned publicly, or has been reported to mention publicly, which is that we cannot rule out the possibility, or we should be very concerned about the possibility of a resurgence in Islamist extremism. They probably use different words, but that's what they meant. I think Tariq Rahman talked specifically about Dhormiyo Ugrobad, and Army Chief talked about possibilities of violence in the name of religion, or some words thereabouts. Okay, so three different things. I'll start with Ehtesham, then Shafiq. Ehtesham, then Zafar, then Shafiq.
So for law and order overall, I think, we expect isolated incidents. The last 10 days before Eid, law and order is slightly weaker in Dhaka. People are leaving, a lot of houses are unattended, even though the one that was the attempt of the robbery was very much attended. So what scares people more, I think, are patterns, as we saw, I think, about a month ago when there were repeated incidents of harassment and assault of women. That's a pattern that worried everyone, that brought reactions from everyone. So as long as there are no overwhelming patterns emerging and law and order remains isolated incidents, which we can somehow deal with by standing up the police from the shell it is now, I hope we can do better. The recurring episodic periods of instability that are being fomented by various actors, I think I've already commented on. I'll come back after I've heard from all of you. What was the third thing?
The supposed threat or risk of religious violent extremism, whether in the form of terrorism, as in as we understand it, bombs going off, or equally bad in the form of mazars being attacked, or you mentioned women being harassed. Dhormiyo Ugrobad, to use Tariq Rahman's word.
Right, and I think we need to propagate and cascade the message that religious extremism is bad, not because a former prime minister said it was bad, which would mean that now in the negative it's good, but because it doesn't lead to anything productive in society, and it usually means that you have become the tool of some other actor who will use you in various ways to destabilize Bangladesh at certain periods of time opportune to them. And you will not be taking Bangladesh in the road you think you are taking Bangladesh to, in that it's becoming a more confessional country. So every outburst of religious extremism in the past has died down and led to a round of prosecution, jail, death penalties. That is likely to be the case going forward as well.
Okay. Zafar and then Shafiq.
Okay, I think, it's hard to get a beat on this, but my sense is that, if you look at the numbers, and it's difficult because, the earlier numbers, were they accurate, were they not? So a lot of this is anecdotal and vibe-based. I think law and order is more or less no better or worse than it has been in general for the average person. Now, of course, there are specific law and order problems for people who are politically active, they are under threat. That's a separate issue which doesn't really impact the day-to-day, you see. And it's interesting, I think all of
no
these...
words are better compared with November. No words are better compared with...
No, I'm talking about years past, and I think
years
much
past.
better,
Okay.
much better
Right.
than compared with November. You see, so I think
Okay.
the current situation is no better or worse than it has been in years past, and certainly better than it has been in the first few months. So I think, again, we're finding our feet on this. And I think all three of these issues, the political drama, the law and order, and even the extremism, are related in that I think a lot of the law and order problems we're facing, and even the extremism problem, which has been alluded to, though we haven't yet faced it, there have been incidents here of attacks on minorities, also on mazars and whatnot. I think all of these have a political angle to them, and they're all done, not just out of a sense of righteousness, we are doing this because our God tells us to do it, but really with a political motivation behind it, to create a sense of instability, to try and advance a certain, whoever the perpetrators are, what their political agenda might be. Okay, so all of these things are there. And I think one thing which will change is, my sense is that the army has not been as, even though they've been granted magistracy powers, they have not been as active in making a secure law and order environment as they could have been. And I think part of that, in a sense, this is just my interpretation, is to actually create pressure on the interim government because I think that for whatever reason, maybe it's to do with the preference internally within the army, maybe it's to do with the pressures being placed in messages they're getting externally, be it the US, be it India, that Waqar certainly is very strongly behind the notion that we must have elections by the end of this year. And he's really made this very apparent in his statements publicly, and I suspect also in private statements to the relevant stakeholders. And part of this might have been the law and order situation might have been the army could have been more helpful, but maybe they felt that were they to take care of everything, that would somehow incline the interim government to dig in for a longer period of time. Now that I think the matter has largely been settled in terms of elections, and we can come back to that, I'm sure many people would have something to say about how settled it is. I think that he is now willing to unleash the full support of the army in defense of law and order, which hasn't actually been there for the last 7 or 8 months. It's a very interesting thing. One of the advisors said recently that on more than one occasion that, you need to have a situation for there to be elections by the end of this year. And then Glazer, there was not a conducive law and order situation. The fault for it largely lied with his allies and supporters, so it was almost a veiled threat, you could see, but clearly people are laying out their positions in terms of what their agenda is. And now I think, as I said, that more and more of the country seems united behind elections, that we will also see the law and order situation stabilize. And to the extent that it doesn't, it will not be organic. It will be very specifically people trying to advance the agenda that we need more stable law and order before we can have elections. It will not be an organic law and order problem. But I think ultimately the police, to some extent, and certainly the army, are now incentivized enough that they will, or aligned enough that they will be able to take control and care of the situation, is my assessment.
Before going to you, Shafiq, I'm just going to pick up on something that Zafar said and throw in a variation of that, which is that there has also been tremendous scrutiny on the army, right? Like, the army's traditional mode of law and order is basically that, okay, I'll go into an area, I will round up the usual suspects, rough them up a bit, and that's it. I mean, sort of if we go back to say 2001 caretaker period, where I mean, this is the thing that upset Awami League the most, is that sort of army went in and basically roughed up the local Awami League cadres, and they thought that, hang on, this is not how it's supposed to be. So sort of that's one thing. And then if you take it to a bit more extreme, it is basically what happened in 2002-3 when BNP actually gave the army, the local camps a list and said that, okay, look, not only are you going to go and rough them up, these are the problems, sort them out, and Operation Clean Heart, right? And none of those things are on the card at the moment at all. I mean, definitely, it's inconceivable that the interim government would have a hit list of people to be sorted out, but also that just simply roughing people up is not something that army would probably feel comfortable doing. I mean, sort of with all the scrutiny, all the spotlight that the newly found freedom that the activists and the media has, right? So that may also be a factor. I would just posit. Okay, Shafiq.
Regarding law and order, before coming to Dhaka, just about a few weeks back, I was kind of apprehensive because, in Dhaka, the notorious traffic and everything. So if you want to move around in your place near your home, taking your car is not like a feasible option in a lot of the time. So I was apprehensive about I like to take rickshaws or even walk around a lot. So I was thinking whether I will be able to do it or not. So the area where I'm living, I see that it's perfectly fine. Nothing is happening, and I think that the situation within Dhaka city is quite normal. So things are going on. As I said, that as Jafar said, that is as good as any previous time. But sometimes you hear about you read about stories for example, just yesterday the story came out about the lot of this food shops, the entertainment shops near the 300 feet area, and an entertainment area where people used to go out after the dusk to hang out, to eat in the 300 feet area, which is about several kilometers away from the Dhaka city. That the many of the shops are abandoned after they are closed after dark because people are feeling insecure going there. So if that's true, that's indicates a problem that maybe the police is too much concentrated, concentrated. They are employing their meager, their smaller strength area or police or army within the Dhaka city and leaving these outlying areas not giving due attention. So that's a problem. If that happens, because I know that I have been to that area before with my wife, and it's a very popular area for Dhaka people to sometimes go there. Just like Ashulia used to be back in the 90s, early 90s or 80s, that we used to take a drive to go to Ashulia and there. So 300 feet area has become like that. So if it's not people are not going there after dark, that indicates a problem, and I'm not sure exactly why. So regarding that, and I'm sure the instability that we are going to talk about, that's mostly political, and we are going to talk about it later. So I don't want to pick on that. And about Islamic extremism, like one incident can throw everything in the air, just as the out of nowhere the holy artisan event happened, and that shook Bangladesh for many months, and it was. So we have to be prepared that anything like that can happen, and you cannot exactly predict that, because it can be either a few, a group of lonely wolves, a few group of splinter cell, those who are in a different kind of messianic mission, or offshoot of it, an international group. So it's not exactly predictable like that, but we have to be prepared for that. But and I think that the thing is needed that all the main political parties and the government have to be prepared what to do when that happens. like how do we present Bangladesh? So apart from just like a terrorist event actually doesn't cause harm within the country that much because it's a localized event. After terrorism happened, it's not that people shut their doors. But what happens is the country's reputation suffers a huge risk. Business, diplomats, everything happens like it's a and now if that happens now in Bangladesh, any incident happens, its aftermath will be more severe because like we are in a different political situation now. So I think that the government, the political parties, everyone should be systematically prepared just to keep their handbook ready, the what to do book ready in case something like that happens. So that that I'm most concerned about. Not like whether terrorism like that indicates any serious problem going on in right now. Yeah, that's all I have to tell for now.
Thanks, Shafiq. So that then leads us to our next set of questions. So we've got two more sets of questions before we close today. Okay, and so the first one is okay. So Ehtesham and Zafar, all three of you actually spoke obliquely about sort of these recurring patterns and sort of instability or episodic instability or people pushing their agenda. So again, I'm going to posit something, and I am going to name names, and then feel free, how you would respond. And I would start with Shafiq, then Zafar, then Ehtesham. Okay. So this is what I'm going to posit, that leaving aside the violent terrorist potential terrorist risks, that is in a category of all on its own. So leaving that aside, because sort of that's a known unknown that we cannot talk, say much about because we don't know. Leaving that aside, there are people who might want to delay an election. So some people are enjoying the perks of power. That may be a very base reason, but more importantly, that some people actually think that the longer the election is postponed, the better their political chances, right? And sort of, and they use or they deploy social media influencers such as Pinaki Bhattacharya and others to make incendiary videos and push messages, instigate things, or things as they sort of or exaggerate episodes that or exaggerate tensions to create these episodes. So that's my statement. What do you guys think? So what order did I say? Shafiq, Zafar, and then Ehtesham.
Okay. Yeah, like that. Now we come to the juicy parts. Like, yeah. So yeah,
you're all going to be famous, okay? Because I named Pinaki.
and yeah, no, like too much things on going on like with Pinaki front. But yeah, like as you know, as the saying goes, like the world is divided into two parts: the exploiters and the exploited, or something like that. The Bangla slogan sounds like a more greater, nicer. But like I like to say the one thing that we have like a lot of people in Bangladesh on all kind of political persuasion and all kind of thing. But I see a one kind of divide like that. Those who want election maybe within this like a year, and those who do not. Those who want to delay it. And I am not going to say that, yeah, there's a clear divide between that. And I'm not saying that those who want to delay election are doing it all from the baser motive. Like there are people, lot of who are very idealistic, like quite idealistic. Those who have pinned a lot of hopes on the transformative, capacity of the July uprising and aftermath. And they're seeing that like this is the one chance we get to transform our republic along, and it will take a long, patient work. And there are people, those who think that this government is doing quite well, and this is quite responsive to popular demand. So why change horses now or something like that? There are those kind of people, but there are like other people, and I would like to I like to call them like after the Hasina fell, she has been looming over us for such a as like a such a as such a big figure that under her everyone was like a pygmies or something like that. None of us had any political agencies. Very few people had political agencies, so we are under the shadow. So after Hasina fell, it's like that we became a country of kings. Like all of us has become kings. Like we can. So the Bangla saying goes. Like আমরা সবাই রাজা এই রাজত্বে আর কি মানে so this is people lot
A
of
Tagore
people
saying, not just a Bangla saying, it's a Tagore song.
it's Tagore song, yeah. So it's like that. Like we are like a lot of people are enjoying this like a political power too much to being like a becoming like a local warlords or local influencer or big influencer, small influencer, different kind of things. I'm not saying that everyone is trying to be a raja, but there are a lot of people that who are trying to who are thinking themselves of raja, and they all fear that once an election happens and another new king comes like a elected, of course, that all this will somewhat go away. So there are those people like that. So yeah, so instability, there is a clear motive for instigating and keeping up the instability, and and I think that there's a like a two clear faction within Bangladesh now: those who want elections at the soonest within this year, and those who want to delay it as far as possible.
Zafar?
Jyoti, if you could reiterate the key points you want me to address.
Well, no, my
Very
statement was that there are people who do not want an election or who want to delay an election because it improves either their electoral chances or their extra electoral political agenda.
Yes, no, and I think that's quite clear. I don't think anyone, I would disagree with Shafiq. I don't think that anyone really has any reform agenda whatsoever. The people who want a longer time, it's not because they want to see reforms. Reforms are a red herring. They want a longer time because they think it will advance their electoral prospects. And it's as simple as that. You see? Interestingly enough, and I think that you've talked about this in your previous podcast right after the Innovision poll, but I think it's very clear that constituency is shrinking greatly. And by now, it certainly there are two groups, as Shafiq has suggested, one is far larger than the other. Right. I think the constituency which wants to see a longer time period is shrinking by the day, and it's paradoxical because it's interesting. I think as you would have imagined, I think at the start people were a little bit concerned because they thought that the interim government was not governing well. And that's one reason we needed elections sooner rather than later. So then you would imagine that as the interim government finds its feet, that people would be more comfortable with a longer tenure. But as they're finding their feet, I think people are now thinking it's not really a question whether it can govern well or govern poorly, but we need to return back to normalcy. This is ultimately, at the end of the day, a transitionary period. A lot of things are on hold, and they will remain on hold. So if you talk to a businessman, they want, at the end of the day, they want continuity and consistency, and they can only really get that after an election. Similarly, if you talk about, foreign investment, all of these things are teed up and lined up, but people really want to see an election. They don't want to see this kind of ongoing transitionary phase. So it's not anymore a reflection of people's judgment on the competence or the performance of the interim government, which I think now people will probably give it fairly decent marks. Certainly compared to 3 or 6 months ago. But I think people really feel that we need to, and maybe this is also to the credit of the interim government, that they have created this mindset that people now feel, look, we really need to get back to business as usual, business is normal. And I also actually feel that even within the student faction, in their party which they have formed, I think for the most part they have also come round to it. If you look at the big brouhaha which took place over last week with this meeting between Hasnat Abdullah and Sharjis and the army chief. It was really only Hasnat who came out with a fairly extreme statement, which is very quickly then countermanded both by Sarjis and also by Patwari, another senior leader in the NCP. You see, so it's not even as though that there's a united position here within the student party. It's really, I think, just one person or a few people. And I think in time, they will also get with the program. I think the this is a statement which has been made many times by the chief advisor. And I think the election train is moving very, very inexorably, and I do not see it. I do not see it being derailed.
In fact, the whole brouhaha between Hasnat Abdullah and army chief and all the rest of it, I mean, sort of all of that really was also very much in the context of an election, right? I mean, supposedly, this whole refined Awami League thing, and we'll talk about the political parties next, but all of that only makes sense in the context of an election. If we had said that, look, election is not going to happen until 2028, then there will be many other things that people will be talking about, but not whether, whether Sabir Hossain Chowdhury is going to run in the election with some support. I mean, that's right. Okay, so Ehtesham, to round up this part of the talk.
So, to me, democracy is a very finite, deterministic thing. You have elections this number of years, these many people come and represent the popular will, they form a parliament, and so on. To pick up on what Japarvai said maybe a minute ago, I think when there was doubt initially about how well the interim government would do, a lot of people didn't feel confident enough to say that we should stay for 2 years or 5 years, because they weren't even sure whether the governing setup could stay for 2 months. And now I think that they've found their groove and, to their credit, brought Bangladesh to generally a stable place. The economic team definitely have been stars and, deserve kudos. They feel more empowered to say that, no, we should stay maybe a little bit longer, do the things that the tired old politicians won't do. But ironically, at the same time, as the consensus is, the election train has started, it'll reach the station, and we will all live happily ever after.
So this is kind of like an inverse or obverse of, or whatever the proper term is, the flip side or mirror image of 1/11, right? Because back then the interim came in and felt supremely confident that we are going to reshape the country, right? That the two political parties were at deadlock, everybody hated them, or like they, that was the perception, right? And therefore, I think, one of the advisors, General Motin, I think, or it was probably Barrister Moinul, one of them actually said, we are going to, we don't take putti much, we take rui katla, big fishes, right? I think that was just after or before Tariq Rahman was arrested. Right, so they came in with that kind of, we are going to do things, and then they found, okay, things are actually much harder than we thought, and the whole thing fell away. Whereas this time, we don't really have a reform agenda. We don't know how long we're going to be around because everything is a mess. So let's just see how things go. And now that things are actually, they are finding their feet, they all of a sudden realize, oh, geez, election train is moving along. Right, okay, on that, the final part of the thing, and the one that I think probably you all, well, I want to hear from you, right? So we've got, let's see. So we've got, again, statements from me, and then we'll go with Ehtesham, and then Shafiq, and then end with Zafar, okay? Okay, statement comes in 3 parts. Firstly, based on what I saw in the polls, but also what I'm hearing, what I'm seeing, anecdotal, BNP and NCP support are highly overrated. By which what I mean is that whilst BNP is probably on track to win a solid majority, even a landslide majority, people are not really keen on BNP. This is a very soft support. So in that sense, BNP is overrated. NCP is overrated in the sense that they're nowhere in the numbers that justify the hype they get on the media. Conversely, Jamaat is highly underrated. They are not visible, but there is a very strong pickup or surge in Jamaat's poll support numbers, and this is not just online hype. Innovation poll was actually a field level poll and so on. So, but not just from the poll, but also from anecdotal evidence that Jamaat is perhaps underrated. And thirdly, Awami League, as it exists, has no future in this election because Hasina still has the grip on the party, and she's not going to allow her party to participate in any election under Yunus. So, three statements about three or four political parties. What did I say? I wanted to end with Zafar. So I'll start with Ehtesham, then Shafiq, then Zafar.
So I'm reminded of a lot of scenarios we see in European countries where, there's the initial voting and then there's a runoff between the top two. And each of these European countries have their own far-right parties that are thought to be taboo, but each year seem to get stronger and stronger, and then all the mainstream parties, come together to stand against them. In France, it's the party of Le Pen. In Germany, it's AFD. In UK also has one of these variations. So my hope is that the innovation poll sort of acted as a wake-up call for everyone else about what a Bangladesh where 30% of the electorate for Jamaat votes, it looks like. Depending on the person, that may be a great picture, it may be a terrible picture, but that gives all of us the space to react to it and the other parties to, then formulate their policies.
But we don't have European style politics, though. We have, Europe has runoffs. That's what, is it runs off or whatever, they have those systems. They have proportional representation. They have, runoff for executive offices and all of those things. We don't have them, right? So how is this going to play out in practice?
In practice, it's going to let decision makers react to this poll and set their strategy accordingly. And I think it's better for everyone that this came out now as opposed to 4 or 5 months later when there may not have been enough time to react to it. We all saw the visuals of Sergis Alom, who I actually rate very highly. I think, he's one of the few NCP politicians I see going strong for a long time, standing in front of that motorcade, waving the flag, and, having that procession. There aren't that many political forces in Bangladesh now who can hold a procession like that. And, I think this is what NCP has to focus on. There's a lot out there for their taking. They just need to step up and grab it and have the electoral politicking that Sergis showed us how to do.
Okay. Thanks, Ehtesham. Shafiq. This is not the last thing. We'll come back for prediction to end. But for now, Shafiq.
Yeah, I have no reason to doubt about the innovation poll. I think it's it's reflecting the ground reality somewhat, and I hope that this poll will be validated or discounted by some other polls that may soon come out. So taking the innovation poll presented picture as a reality, I think, yeah, it's true that there's a Jamaat this truly having a have Jamaat support has surged in the last like decade. We could, like there could we could talk hours about what could be the reason for that, but and so BNP should be worried about that. But I think that just as Ehtesham said that this should be this should be a wake up call for them, and I think that it's going to wake them up. Um, a few things like Tariq Rahman is likely to come back very soon to Bangladesh, and that will like galvanize a lot of BNP support because he has been away for so long, and there's nothing like a leader coming back after a long exile is like a story written into itself. And his just mere his presence will be a big factor. And also BNP will probably like this time since Awami League is not here and the Jamaat strong Jamaat presence is there, I think a lot of the cultural forces in Bangladesh will support BNP, and so will BNP will probably run a very strong, smart campaign, smart, culturally relevant, and a confident campaign. And I think that campaign will change a lot of the minds about among the undecided people, and we know that like people like to go with the winners. So I think that the campaign factor, the election factor, that will be have a lot of impact. So that's all going to happen this year. But in the long term, we should be really very worried about growing religious conservatism in the country, and we are planning to do a further discussions on that because all that we have seen that growing modernization in the Islamic countries in all everywhere else, we have seen that creates rise in more religious conservatism. Ironically, it's not the poor people or uneducated people who became more conservative religiously and they become more politically conservative in that way, but it's the middle class. Like their aspirations, their value systems change to support those kind of things. So that's the thing that we should be worried about, and those of us who want to see a secular democracy, liberal democracy in Bangladesh, we should be most mindful about that. But in this election, I think the BNP support is much softer. Jamaat is like has gained a lot of strength, but the campaign factor, I think, because Jamaat is not a unified party, but BNP is, and like a coming back, if a smart campaign can make a lot of difference. Yeah, that's my view.
Okay.
Zafar?
I think that it is premature because I think Shafiq raises a very good point that, as and when the Tariq Rahman comes back to Bangladesh, that is, of course, going to galvanize BNP voters and supporters. Similarly, when the Innovision poll, which I also agree we have no reason to question, was conducted, the NCP had not yet been formed. So, of course, to the extent that people were talking about support for a student party, they were talking about a party which had yet to exist. And so certainly now that it has been formed, we've seen the contours, we've seen what it's about, we can expect it to pick up steam. So, on the one hand, if you look, I think there was a previous poll which showed support for a putative student party at 16%, coming down to 5% in the Innovision poll, which seems like a dramatic drop. But then again, if you bear in mind now that they actually have formed a party, that it's not as though it's a one-way trajectory. They could now rise again, and that remains to be seen.
And also the 16% was just after the aura of Sheikh Hasina fleeing, right? I mean, there was that halo factor there, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So we don't know. We really don't know. And as I've suggested elsewhere, it could be that a lot of the people expressing support for Jamaat, it was not necessarily expressing support for Jamaat per se, but you have to understand for the last 15 years, you couldn't, there was a big tap placed on religiosity and religion-based politics. And if you want to suggest that that you disagree with that, a shorthand way of conveying it to a pollster may be to say, I'm going to support Jamaat. That doesn't necessarily mean people who feel that way will necessarily go to Jamaat at the end. And it's interesting to note with the NCP have certainly staked out a right of center position on social issues. I don't think they've given us an economic vision yet, but on social issues, they've been very clear. And I think all of us have to accept that there has been a movement to the right socially in Bangladesh, which all political parties have to contend with at some level. And that's just something we have to deal with. What does that mean? What are the contours of it? What are our red lines? All discussions we need to all be having. I think another element which plays into the Jamaat's apparent popularity is they are still seen, and not without reason, to be a relatively uncorrupt political party. And I think part of the problem with the students is we are now also hearing reports that they now have their hand out, and that they are, that this whole notion that the students are this new generation of people in Bangladesh who are, pure as the driven snow. I think that belief is really falling by the wayside. And so then again, you have the BNP, you have the Awami League, both are tainted by decades of corruption. And you're seeing that even in the last 8 months, that the students themselves are getting in on the game, from what I understand. You won't see it reported in newspapers, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's not happening.
But do they actually matter for votes, though? As you said, Awami League and BNP had, their taints and their skeletons, and that never really stopped people from voting.
Well, I think it does. I think it does. You see, I think the way it matters is that why would you vote for the students? You would vote if you really believe that they offered something new and different.
Right. So you'd rather vote for
something
BNP.
New and different. But if they're not going to order something or give you something new and different, you might as well stick with the known party. Or you could even think about Jamaat. That's different as well. And the thing with Jamaat is there are two elements of the Jamaat that you always have to understand. One is their assessment of the current situation of Bangladesh, which has for a long time been not so far off the mark as far as the average voter goes. They have correctly identified a lot of the corruption which is at the heart of the system in Bangladesh, and correctly identified what is wrong and how things are wrong. Now, where you and I may differ is in the prescription, which they offer as a solution, but many Bangladeshis may be willing to take a chance on that prescription because they agree with them in terms of the diagnosis. So this is something we all need to keep an eye on. I think, and I think the opportunity, though, there is for the BNP. Again, when Tariq comes back, he has been making all the right noises. And I think if he continues to make these noises and really leans in to anti-corruption and good governance when he's in Bangladesh, he can really turn around that perception of the BNP. It is not helped right now by the fact that many BNP junior cadres are out there doing chandabaji and all of that stuff. But if they can put some kind of a lid on that, I think there's a big opportunity there for that. But it's early days yet.
This is, as the election train moves along, we'll continue to have these conversations because A, we're political junkies, but B, our listeners probably would actually appreciate the nuances that you guys are bringing out. We are looking at time, we are looking at ending soon. So one last prediction, last word. Who wants to go first?
Why don't you go first?
I'm asking. Okay, all right, I'll go first. Look, I think that we are going to have a peaceful transition to democracy. We are probably going to have a comfortable BNP victory. It's probably next year that the challenges will start surfacing, both on the economy and the politics, and they would be interrelated. That's where I'd start.
I'll go next. I can say that there will be elections by the end of this year. I think the Awami League will not be banned. Whether they
we haven't talked about Awami League at all today. We should come back and do that later, probably.
We should. Whether they will participate in the election or not is an interesting question. You see, and of course, you had suggested that you don't see Hasina participating under an election held by the interim government, and I feel that would be her preference as well. In which case, then all this pressure to ban them is kind of unnecessary, because if they ban themselves, why would you want to get the odium of banning them? But some people understand that, other people do not. And I think, yes, I think in the end we will have a relatively peaceful and relatively painless, not fully painless, but as far as these things go, transition to democracy. And then let's see where that takes us. Yeah.
Okay.
Shafiq bhai, do you want to?
Yeah, I think the election will happen by this year, and we should have really talked about Awami League, but we didn't. But the Awami League question will loom large. But if the election happens, the election fever will take over the country, and probably Awami League will prudently stay away from this election because they don't want their like a fall to be sealed with a ignominious defeat, like an electoral defeat, because this election is going to be fair. So they will maybe prudently stay out. But Awami League supporters will not probably, because if the whole country gets gripped by election fever, Awami League, general Awami League people, normal Awami League supporters, they will also be compelled to vote. And if you get the chance to vote, and whichever way they will vote, it will be an interesting thing. I think it will create a lot of new avenues for thought, like how the Awami League vote will go. Like so, yeah, election happening this year, but where does the Awami League support goes? That will be an interesting thing to see.
Ehtesham?
So I think the last 15 years, the discussions like these would start with thinking about how the former prime minister would think and react and end with that. And right now, after 7 months after her departure, the country is headed by an 84-year-old. The largest party is a messy coalition that's held together by really one person. And the loudest voice for a timely election is the chief of army, and we have no idea what his subordinate generals feel. So I very much hope we can transition away next year and focus more on institutions and less on people.
Okay. With that note, we're going to end. I understand, Shafiq, that the recording will be out before Eid, in which case, wishing the audience a very auspicious Eid, its festivities, and we're also going to have the Bangla Noboborsho, Bangla New Year in a few weeks. So sort of wishing everyone a happy New Year, Shubha Noboborsho. And of course, we had the Independence Day yesterday, so Independence Day greetings as well. Thank you, Zafar, Shafiq, and Ehtesham. It's we'll come back and talk about these things again. Okay, recording off. Oh, recording